Jets fans, you may be down on Aaron Glenn. I know I am, but the best thing that could happen for this team is for Glenn to have success in 2026. Let's discuss why.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm John B. from GangGreenNation.com, and today's episode is brought to you by Kalshi. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app and use code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade $10. On today's show, we have our weekly mailbag. We'll talk about some players to watch as Cutdown Day approaches. We'll discuss expectations from Kenyan Sadiq, but let's start by talking about Aaron Glenn. First of all, thanks so much to everybody who sent in questions. Let's begin. Our first question. John, I'm worried about this season. The Jets are more talented, so they should win more games. But my nightmare scenario is this team going 6-11, retaining Aaron Glenn, drafting a quarterback, and having Glenn mess things up because he's not a good coach. Are these concerns valid? Well, I will start by noting that I have been a pretty vocal Aaron Glenn critic over the last year or so. The first couple months last year, I tried to cut Glenn slack because I try and cut any first-year coach slack. I think that it's really hard when you're a first-time head coach in this league. There are so many things you've never thought of before that are now under your control. And Glenn inherited, if we're going to be honest, what was a horrific situation. He had a roster without talent, a team without cap space, and he was short on draft picks. It's like the ultimate nightmare scenario to inherit. So I think that heading into 2025, expectations were not super high, but I wanted to see certain things from Glenn. I wanted to see the team improve over the course of the season. I wanted to see young players develop. I wanted the Jets to be a tenacious team, a feisty team, and a smart team. And we really did not see those things. The worst part for me, though, was the end of the season, where the Jets just completely fell apart. Again, my biggest objective for the 2025 Jets was to be a better team in December and January than they were in September, October. Well, in December, January, they played one of the worst stretches in NFL history. So I think it's fair to be skeptical of Aaron Glenn right now. I can't blame you if you are. I know I am. But heading into the season, you got to root for wins. I said what I thought about Glenn at the end of last season. And I was vocal that if it was up to me, Glenn would not be here for a second season. And I would have gone hard after John Harbaugh. If we could not get John Harbaugh, I don't think Mike Tomlin wanted to coach this year. So he would have been another guy I'd be interested in. I don't think anybody could have gotten him this year. I think he was just done with coaching, at least for the time being. But if you couldn't get Harbaugh, I would have gone after Kevin Stefanski, who I think is a good coach and succeeded in a very difficult situation in Cleveland. 2 Coaches of the Year awards, a couple of playoff berths, not the easiest place to be a head coach, and he found a way to have success. So I say this as somebody who's been pretty critical of Glenn. So I think I have some degree of credibility on this issue. I'm not someone who's made excuses left and right for him over the last year. I've called him to account. But I can't get there behind the idea that the best thing for the Jets is to have a disaster season so Glenn gets fired because you're worried that maybe there's a mirage 6-win season that allows them to keep him and then he messes up the starting quarterback. Now, I want to be clear. That is possible. There are situations in Jets history, especially recent Jets history, where maybe the team won some games that weren't that meaningful. It led them to make a bad decision to retain a coach or maybe a general manager. And we know that we have an owner who's kind of susceptible to being fooled by things like this. I mean, you go back to 2019, the Jets started 1-7. It was a disaster year. They lost to a horrendous 0-7 Dolphins team. They end up winning six of the last 8 games under Adam Gase, but it wasn't an impressive 6 wins. I mean, they beat horrible teams like the Giants and Washington, and they beat Miami in the rematch. And then they had a victory against the Steelers when Pittsburgh was playing its 3rd-string quarterback. In the last game of the year, they narrowly beat the Bills' backups. Bills benched their starters because they clinched a playoff berth. It was a very unconvincing 6-2 stretch. But it led the Jets to bring Adam Gase back. You know, you could even go back to that first Idzik year. Everybody forgets that the first year with John Idzik, the team was a pleasant surprise. They were expected to be horrible. They ended up going 8-8. They had a 2-game winning streak at the end of the year, and that led Woody Johnson to bring back Rex Ryan for one more year. And I think looking back, I did not feel this way at the time, but looking back, it probably would have been best for the Jets to just move on from Rex. I feel like the Rex era was kind of over at that point. So yes, it's possible you get a mirage year, but I'll tell you the worst case scenario for the Jets. Worst case scenario is another horrible, horrible year. Because if the Jets go like 3-14 again, it means that we have not made the right player acquisition moves. And it means that the guys we drafted this year are off to a really bad start in their careers. I don't think you can go 3-14 or 2-15 or 4-13, whatever terrible record you want to throw out there. I don't think the Jets can have a horrible year and the rookie class be performing to expectations. Remember 2022? That was the year the Jets had the offensive rookie of the year, Garrett Wilson. They had the defensive rookie of the year, Sauce Gardner. They had Breece Hall, who I think would have won the offensive rookie of the year that year instead of Garrett Wilson had he not gotten injured midseason. Jermaine Johnson had a pretty good season as the number 3 defensive end. You forget about this because of the way his career went after his rookie year, but Michael Clemens was actually a pretty decent rotational guy his rookie year. Sounds crazy to say now. I mean, his name is a punchline among Jets fans, the ultimate guy who doesn't do anything except pick up personal fouls. But that rookie year, he was actually a pretty decent rotational guy. He looked like he was going to be a 4th round success story. And that took the Jets from 4-13 in 2021, where, they were not very good, and they had a top 5 pick in the next year, to 7-10. And they were a 7-10 that was making noise early in the season. There was a point where they were 7-4 and they went into December in playoff position. It was just a team that was derailed by an unstable quarterback situation. So I think about 2022. I think about the 2006 season 20 years ago when the Jets drafted DeBrickashaw, Ferguson, and Nick Mangold. That, like 2013, was a year where Jets were supposed to be the worst team in the league entering that year. The year before had gone horribly. They were 4-12. Chad Pennington had suffered a career-altering injury. They were in very bad cap situation. Very bad cap situation. They were supposed to be horrible in 2006, and they drafted Brickashaw, Ferguson, and Nick Mangold. And look, a big part of that was they had the easiest schedule in the league, but everybody knew they'd have an easy schedule going into that season. Nobody was expecting that team to do anything. They went 10-6 and made the playoffs. And then you could talk about other great Jets draft classes like 2000. They missed the playoffs that year, but they established a real base of talent for that team. So the point is, when you have a big time draft class, it improves your team. And it's really important for the guys the Jets drafted this year to be good players, because we're thinking about maybe drafting a quarterback next year. And some of the guys the Jets picked, Kenyan Sadiq, Omar Cooper, those are guys that are going to play a big role in making this hypothetical quarterback work out or not helping this hypothetical quarterback work out. We need these guys to be really good right off the bat. And, David Bailey, this is a guy who can be the sort of pass rusher the Jets have lacked for 2 decades. They've had some guys who are decent pass rushers, but they haven't had that guy where the defense is focused on him and they're throwing everything they got at him. They're double teaming, they're chipping, they're sliding everyone towards him, and he can still get to the quarterback. Jets haven't had that guy in a while. They need Bailey to be that guy. D'Angelo Pons, well, it's hard to find good corners in this league because of the way the rules are. You can only touch a receiver 5 yards down the field. That's the only time you can get physical with a receiver. So once you get to like the intermediate passing range, really hard to play corner. We need Pons to be one of the exceptions. We need him to be a guy who can lock up other receivers, whether it's in the slot or on the outside. So yes, I have skepticism with Aaron Glenn. There's no question about it. I'm not going to use the phrase he deserves the benefit of the doubt, because what did he do last year to show he deserves the benefit of the doubt? Nothing. But the best case scenario for the Jets is to have a good season. And, we can't be afraid of like these like eventualities, because the season could go like a million different directions. Yeah, like there are some scenarios where Glenn doesn't do a good job, but the team ends up keeping him and it's a mistake. And Woody Johnson got fooled because the roster was better, but Glenn really didn't improve. That's a possibility, but that's not the worst case scenario for the Jets. The worst case scenario, again, is a disaster year, because that puts the Jets behind. I mean, if the Jets don't hit on this draft, they'll be put back. It'll set the team back years. If they hit on this draft, you know what? We've gone a long way towards fixing what was wrong with this franchise. Maybe not all the way, but we've gone a long way. And to me, like, that's more valuable than like worrying about, do we keep Aaron Glenn mistakenly? Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast. We're going to talk Kenyan Sadiq. He's been out a couple of weeks with an injury. What are realistic expectations for him as a rookie? Well, I think you got to look to history to figure that out. And that's what we'll do as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is brought to you by Kalshi. Before the season even kicks off, everyone's making predictions. Who wins the division? Who makes the playoffs? Who's lifting the trophy at the end of the season? On Kalshi, America's #1 prediction market platform, you can trade those predictions in a live market. Can the Jets win at least 10 games this season? I mean, let's dream big. Well, the Jets are currently trading at a 14% probability, meaning a $100 trade pays out $565.23 if they win at least 10 games. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. Trade the draft pick, the game, and more on Kalshi. Download the Kalshi app and use code LOCKEDON to get $10 when you trade $10. Kalshi, Kalshi. Trade on anything. 18 plus only. Restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Kalshi products are not available in all jurisdictions. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. Support for today's episode comes from Square. Behind so many of the local businesses people visit every day is Square, a platform designed to help businesses sell, manage, and grow. Whether it's a neighborhood coffee shop, a packed sports bar on game day, or your favorite restaurant, Square brings payments, banking, and more together in one connected system. It helps business owners spend less time managing technology and more time focusing on their customers. Square is not just a payment processor. It's a complete business platform built to simplify the day-to-day. From accepting every major payment method to managing inventory and helping businesses access their earnings faster, Square gives owners the tools they need to run their business with confidence. It's the little things for me, like when a restaurant is slammed, but the staff never looks stressed, or when checkout is fast no matter how busy it gets. You're not waiting around. Nothing feels chaotic, and it just feels organized. That kind of experience usually comes from having Square keeping everything connected in the background. If you're starting a business or running one that deserves better tools, Square helps you sell, manage, and grow without slowing down. Right now, you can get up to $200 off Square hardware at square.com/go/LockedOnNFL. That's SQUARE.com/GO/LockedOnNFL. Run your business smarter with Square. Get started today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day, and for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. A big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Let's continue now with our weekly mailbag. Our next question: John, what is the basis for enthusiasm for a first-round tight end who has not shown he can deliver? It feels like every year we went further and further away from the sure thing at tight end and are now chasing the worst of vague hopes after missing out on Brock Bowers and Tyler Warren. So I guess this is from someone who was not a big fan of Kenyan Sadiq in the draft. And just as in the first segment, I told you that I have some credibility because I've been very critical of Aaron Glenn. Here I'm going to tell you, I think I have some credibility because Kenyan Sadiq was not my favorite pick in the draft. In fact, heading into the draft on draft day, I specifically said that he was like one of the players I did not want the Jets to take. It was not because he was a bad prospect, but just because I think he was like maybe the most boomer bust prospect in the first round. And these picks, especially the one the Jets used to take Sadiq, critical to the success of this rebuild. I mean, I think it's not an exaggeration to say that the first and second round picks in 2026 and 2027 will play a large role in determining whether Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji are ultimately successful here. And again, I was not a huge fan of the Sadiq pick, but I do see the logic behind it. I think that that's what the question really is. The question is really asking why did they do this? Now, I'm assuming that when the question says that he hasn't shown he can deliver, they're discussing his lack of college production. I don't think anybody should get on Sadiq because he's injured in training camp. I hope that's not what it means because this kid's got a whole career in front of him, and he can't help that he was injured. So let's address the lack of production in college because it's real. Sadiq was the least productive, at least in terms of statistics, the least productive first-round tight end in about a decade and a half. There was not much production at Oregon. But that was his age. His final season in college was his age 20 season. He's very young. He just turned 21 in May. So this is his age 21 season, his rookie year. So he's a young rookie. The reason that's relevant, we always talk about how tight end's a difficult position to transition to from college to the NFL because there's so many different aspects of the position. You're a blocker, but you're also a receiver. You essentially got to do everything a wide receiver does, but you have to learn a whole set of extra routes because you're lining up in line at tight end next to the tackle. And then you have to figure out how to block. So it's like you're part receiver, part offensive lineman. A lot to pick up. Well, the transition's not completely different from what you go through in college. Now, I know Oregon's offense has a few quirks to it, so maybe it's a little bit different. But if you look through the history of college tight ends, the age 21 season, this is what Sadiq's going into. Sadiq would normally be in college here. A player at Sadiq's age is normally in college. This is the season where you look for the breakout. As outside of Brock Bowers, there are not many tight ends who had their breakout season at age 20. One of the question mentioned Tyler Warren. Well, Tyler Warren was not super productive until his final year at Penn State. So Warren was older. Now, Bowers is like a once in a generation type prospect. I'm not going to use the phrase I'm not going to use the word everybody uses. I'll use it, generational. I hate that word. It's become so overused, but I think it actually applies in Bowers' case. But you just can't expect a guy at Sadiq's age to have had a monster season in college. And, even so, even though his statistics weren't spectacular, he finished first on his team in receptions and second on his team in receiving yards. And that was a great Oregon team last year. So it's not like he did zero. Now, the thing that scared me is something I mentioned just now, that you don't usually see the breakout until like age 21 for tight ends. And that means like we took him without knowing whether the breakout was actually going to happen. That means we're just like assuming the breakout's going to happen. And I'm not going to lie, that scares me a little bit, but I can see the upside. I mean, he's one of the most athletic prospects in history. So if it clicks for him, it's going to click in a big way. And I'm talking like all pro talent. That's what the guy has. Now, will he get there? I don't know. That's one of the reasons I wasn't super comfortable with the pick myself. But I think that it's fair to say that, you're a little skeptical. That said, even after saying that, though, I mean, this guy has so much upside. I think that, if you're a Jets fan, you can definitely dream of a realistic scenario where Kenyan Sadiq hits it big and turns into not just a star, but a superstar. He's got that sort of ability. So if it clicks for him, it could click in a big way. That's the reason the Jets made the pick. You don't have to agree with it, but I think that there is definitely a path for Sadiq to be great. Next question. If Omar Cooper and Kenyan Sadiq fail to materialize, what does it say about our scouting? Will Glenn survive such a season? What's your estimate of the desired total for the two? Do they need 900 yards between them? What's your bar? Okay, if Omar Cooper and Kenyan Sadiq fail to materialize, is it a mark against the Jets scouting? Well, of course, but you could just as easily ask if Kenyan Sadiq and Omar Cooper are great. Isn't it a credit to Jet scouting? Of course. So I think, like if they pan out, it'll be a huge win for Jet scouting. If they don't, it'll be a big loss. What are realistic expectations for Cooper and Sadiq, though? And what I always like to do in this situation, I like to look at every player who was recently drafted at their position around the same range in the draft, because the NFL doesn't have a 1,000 batting average. They don't hit on 100% of their picks, but generally speaking, over the big picture, the league gets it right. The guys who are most pro ready go at the top of the draft. The guys who are, the first round produces the most players who are ready to play. Second round produces the second most players. So if we like group guys around the range where this guy was drafted, it should give us a range of like how much we should expect in year one. So for Sadiq, I took a look at wide receivers and tight ends who were drafted between 10 and 20 in the last decade. And the reason I took between 10 and 20, well, he was 16. So guys who were drafted between 10 and 20 were picked around his range. And I'm using wide receivers and tight ends because, let's be honest, you're not drafting a tight end in the top 20 for his blocking skills. You're drafting him to be an impact receiver. And that's especially true when you take someone who is as athletic as Kenyan Sadiq. So what do the numbers tell us? Well, of the guys who were drafted between 10 and 20, the median range was about like Colston Loveland, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Colston Loveland had 713 yards for the Bears last year. Jackson Smith and Jigba had 628 for the Seahawks back in 2023. So I think you're looking like 700 yards. Now, there's a caveat here. Frank Reich, Jets offensive coordinator, yesterday was speaking to the media, and he indicated that, you know what, Sadiq's missed a couple weeks in camp. We may need to scale things back for him the first couple of weeks. So, I mean, is that a realistic expectation to hit 600 or 700 yards when the offensive coordinator is saying, you know what, he's kind of behind the curve? And to be fair, I did say this myself, that of the Jets players on the roster, Sadiq was maybe the one for whom training camp was most important. So it's difficult to say like what we can expect in the early stages. But I will say this, and once we get to November, December, January, he should be playing at that pace. You know, even if he doesn't post 600, 700 yards in the entire season, he should be producing at like a 700 yard pace prorated over the last like 2-3 months of the season. That's what I'd be looking for him. As far as Cooper goes, I took guys who were drafted between 25 and 35. Cooper was drafted 30th, so that seemed like a fair measure to me. And looking at the players who were drafted in that range, the median was somewhere around like Elijah Moore with the Jets, who had 538 yards as a rookie. Now, of course, we hope Cooper has a better second season and beyond for the Jets. We hope he doesn't turn into Elijah Moore, because Elijah Moore, you know, obviously had a disappointing exit to his Jets tenure and honestly has not really proven himself to be good. Remember how like fired up everybody was when the Jets drafted Elijah Moore? Remember how much praise they got from draft analysts? And Elijah Moore just really ended up not being that good. Well, his rookie year was about 538 yards. So I think that would be that was like right around the middle of the pack. And it shows you that sometimes a player looks promising as a rookie and then the trajectory just kind of goes downward. But I think that's a fair expectation for Cooper his rookie year, somewhere in the 550 yard range. So what are we saying then? So, you know, with Sadiq, I said 600 to 700 yards. I mean, again, like maybe we have to prorate things. Maybe we have to wait for like October, November before him to hit that rate after he's got some practice under his belt. But I do think like that's around the range you're looking for. With Cooper, maybe 550 yards. So what's that make it? Like 1,150 to 1,250 yards between the two of them. I think that's fair. And that kind of slots in with where they're supposed to be on the depth chart. You know, Garrett Wilson's going to be the go-to guy. We're looking for Garrett to go over 1,000 again. A.D. Mitchell, there are big expectations on him. We'll see whether he can live up to them. For supporting players to go 500 to 700 yards, that's pretty good for like your third or fourth option in the passing game. So I think that those are fair expectations. Now, head here on the Locked On Jets podcast. Cutdown days coming up fast. Guys who are playing late in the preseason games, guys who are playing in the third and fourth quarter, sometimes they have a difficult path to the roster, but one player's been standing out, and he might be a threat to make the Jets roster. We'll discuss as we continue here on this Wednesday mailbag edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. There are more live events than ever worth seeing right now. Games, concerts, comedy shows, festivals. The hard part usually is not deciding what you want to attend. It's actually getting the tickets. Between long wait times, confusing checkout processes, and surprise fees, buying tickets can sometimes feel harder than it should. And that's why so many fans are turning to Game Time. The app is built to make buying tickets simple with upfront pricing, seat views before you buy, and exclusive savings opportunities that help you get to the events you want without the usual hassle. I don't just tell you about Game Time, I'm a customer. A couple weeks ago, it was game day. Jets were playing Tampa Bay preseason opener. I said, you know what? I want to go to the game. It's a beautiful night in the New York area. Found great seats for $22 a few hours before the game. And they were right behind the field goal post on the second level. Amazing seats. I'm going to start looking. I don't know. I think maybe I should go this Friday when the Jets play the Giants in the preseason finale. Well, if I do, I'm getting my tickets off Game Time because it's the place to get last-minute tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets to every type of event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Wednesday, we're doing our weekly mailbag show. Let's continue now. Our next question comes from Taylor, who writes, John, out of the players who were prominently featured in the second half of preseason games, name one you'd like to see make the team and one that you have seen enough of and would like to see cut. I think that I have to go with the obvious choices of guys I'd like to see make the team. The two guys who have started in the two exhibition games, Moribamba, the standout in game one, just looked tenacious in coverage. I love the way he played the game. And in game two, Nate Lynn, who had the 2 sacks against Broderick Jones. I honestly don't know if I need them to make the team, though, because I don't think the Jets are going to have a tough time getting either guy onto the practice squad. I feel like at this time of year when the Jets have some guy who's a standout in the preseason, people think like other teams are going to covet that player. But the thing is, like, almost all the other 32 teams have their own Moribamba and Nate Lynn, who they want to make sure they sneak onto the practice squad. So I don't think that there's going to be a huge, like, push from another team to get one of those two guys if the Jets cut them. And if they, end up becoming available, I imagine the Jets will get either of them to the practice squad. And look, I know Nate Lynn played great against the Steelers in preseason week 2, but he was available as a free agent into August. Teams had every opportunity to sign him. And I just don't know if like you have a scouting report on a player and you just decide we're not going to sign him. There's a couple exhibition performances, even against Broderick Jones, really change your mind. So I guess those would be my two choices for guys I'd like to see. I know it was not super creative, but I don't think anybody's really going to disagree with that. I think sometimes the obvious choices are obvious, and the guys who deserve it based on the preseason games right now are Moribamba and Nate Lynn. And I'm not super worried because, again, I think the Jets can get either of them onto the practice squad. All right, as far as, who have I seen enough of who they should cut? I mean, I'm never happy to see anybody cut. I always think that cutdown day, which is coming up in a few days, is one of the most difficult days of the year because you have guys who have been working towards this their entire life. They want to be on an NFL roster. And for many of them, their dream will end. And I always think that it's a very melancholy day in that sense. I've been critical of Arian Smith. Arian Smith's got to do something on Friday night against the Giants to convince me he deserves to be on this team because I've seen nothing in preseason that makes me feel like Arian Smith should be on this team. That would be an obvious choice. The guy who really comes to mind is Braiden McGregor. And I take no joy in saying this. McGregor made the team as a UDFA a couple of years ago and just hasn't grown. I think that when you're a developmental prospect, in order for the Jets to continue investing time into your development, you have to show that you're getting better. And I think that Braiden McGregor did a great job a couple of years ago convincing the Jets coaching staff that he deserved a roster spot, but I just haven't seen him improve since then. And now we're in, year 3. I don't know that there's really a case to continue with this developmental project. Another guy who's getting a lot of love, I just don't see it, as Jelani Woods. He's been getting some buzz across the Jets fan base. I guess he's played pretty well in training camp. Now, I can see why the Jets might want to keep an extra tight end because the investments they've made at the position suggest that like Frank Reich's going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets. You'll even see some 3 tight end sets at times. They have a first-round pick invested in Kenyan Sadiq. A year ago, they invested a 2 in Nathan Taylor, and they just gave Jeremy Ruckert a big contract. But now with Sadiq gone, you want to make sure you have enough bodies at the position. But I just don't see it in Jelani Woods. I mean, should Jelani Woods stay because he had a walk-in touchdown that was pretty much schemed up for him in the preseason game against Pittsburgh? I mean, I went back and broke down the preseason game against Tampa. I did a video breakdown on Bailey Zappi's performance. And I'm not saying Jelani Woods was responsible for both interceptions because he wasn't, but Jelani Woods was in the middle of the play on 2 interceptions. The first one, I don't think he ran a great route. Now, Zappi still shouldn't have thrown the ball, but I don't think he ran a great route. I don't think he fought back for the ball well enough. The second one, he and Omar Cooper ran the same route. And one of the two of them ran the wrong route. And my thought is that it's probably Jelani because if you look at the end zone view of that interception Zappi threw, when he looks in that area, he's looking at Cooper. So I think he's expecting Cooper to be there. I don't think he's expecting Jelani to be there. So I don't know. I don't think Jelani Woods should be on this team. And I don't like that Andrew Beck could be cut in favor of Woods because I think Beck's a good player. I think, first of all, Beck's a quality blocker. He's a guy who you could throw the ball to occasionally out of the backfield. But also, I really think Breece Hall would benefit from having a fullback in front of him. I think Breece would benefit from having a lead blocker he can follow into the hole every play. So I would not keep Jelani Woods over Andrew Beck. So I know the question only asks for one, but I have a number of guys who are kind of on my radar as players I might like to see kept at least on the practice squad, and then some guys who maybe don't belong on the team going forward. Next question, John, can you take us through the process of cutdown day? We hear a lot about stuff like the waiver wire, but it's difficult to understand. What can you please explain to us all the mechanics of this? So Jets have to cut their roster from 90 players down to 53. In the offseason and through training camp, you can have 90 players. But on cutdown day, which comes a couple days after the end of the preseason, it'll come on Sunday this year, you have to cut down from 90 to 53. the league through time has had like multiple cut down days. Sometimes like they've had like the first cuts after the first or second preseason game where you have to go from 90 to 75. But the league has like kind of thought better of that in recent years. So now we're just going straight for there's only one cut down day. It's 90 to 53. And it depends on how much experience you have in the league. So if you have 4 years of experience, it's very simple. If you get cut, you're a free agent. You can go sign with anybody. You're free to do whatever you want. You have less than 4 years of experience in the league, it gets a little bit more complicated. You are then subject to what's known as the waiver wire. And the way the waiver wire works is when the Jets cut you, if you have less than 4 years of experience, the other 31 teams in the league have a day usually to say, I want you. I want this guy. And if any of the 31 other teams says, you know what, we want this guy, you go to that team and your Jets contract travels with you. The contract you sign with the Jets now becomes the contract you're on the other team. If more than one team claim you, then we get into the waiver order. And essentially what that means is whatever team had a higher original pick in the first round of the NFL draft gets you. Essentially, it's a mechanism to to help the bad teams get better, because the idea is like the teams that had higher draft picks last year need more help, so we're going to help them out. So once we get into a couple weeks of the regular season, that's not the order. It's not about draft anymore. It's about your actual record during the season. But on cutdown day and before the start of the season and through the first couple weeks of the season, they just revert whatever team had the higher original pick in the first round of the NFL draft gets you. And that's kind of how it works, which means the Jets have the second claim. There's only one team, only the Raiders have a higher claim than the Jets. So if another team cuts a guy with less than 4 years of experience, the Jets essentially get them if they want him, unless the Raiders also want him, which is a good advantage, which is a nice thing for the Jets. There's one other thing I'm going to mention, because some of you may be familiar with the waiver process in your fantasy football league, and you may recognize a mechanism where like if multiple teams claim a player, he goes to the team with the top claim in the waiver process. And again, for the NFL, Raiders would be number one, Jets would be number two. In your fantasy football league, if you are at the top of the waiver claim list and you claim a player, you go to the bottom. That's not how it works in the NFL. NFL is just based on record, because they're trying to, or in the offseason, it's based on draft positioning, because they're trying to help the teams that have struggled get better. So the Jets could claim a guy, they stay number two. Doesn't matter. They could claim 5 guys. They'll stay number 2. They don't drop to the bottom like maybe happens in your fantasy football league. And then after the waiver wire process happens, if nobody claims you, you become a free agent and you can sign with any other team's roster, or you can start signing with practice squads. And the way the practice squad works is every team gets 17 players that they sign to their practice squad. These guys are essentially like parts of the team. They practice, they go to the team meetings, they prepare for the games. They're just not on the 53-man roster, and they get less money. Teams can call players up to the active roster for games from the practice squad. But you're kind of like halfway on the roster. When you're on the practice squad, you're actually still a free agent technically. You can go sign with another team's roster. And the way the practice squad works is, again, there's 17 players on the practice squad. 10 of those guys have to be first or second year players. 6 of them can be guys with any level of experience, and 1 has to be an international player. So that's how the practice squad works, and that's how the waiver wire works. That's a brief summary. I'm sure we're going to go over it again, though, in the next couple of days. So if you did not follow all of that, I'll explain it again as we get closer to cutdown day. But anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Have a great Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets. See you then.